Hello and welcome back to Business 226. We're going to talk about Chapter 4 now. In this chapter, we're going to talk about ratio analysis, the DuPont equation, effects of improving ratios, limitations of ratio analysis, and some qualitative factors. So, like we talked about last time, every chapter going out, we're going to be talking about. I'll have the PowerPoint up, and if you want to follow along with the case examples. That way you can kind of see what I'm talking about in the full case. So here we have a balance sheet. We have our estimated, that's what that E means, estimated, best guess, assets. Here's what we had in 2021. Remember De Leon's estimated, and this is actuals. And this is our estimated income statement. All right, we're making money. We're actually above zero and at 255, which is much, much better than this 160. Our estimated, oh, look at that. Our estimated shares are going to go up 150,000. EPS is over $1. Dividends per share, 22 cents. Stock price, look at that. Almost 6 times. So why are ratios useful? I touched on this in chapter 3. It standardizes numbers and facilitates comparisons. If you look at any industry, you will see ratios that are commonly used and how you can compare them to each other. Um, Ratios are used to highlight weaknesses and strengths. It's a way to measure how you're doing. Ratio comparisons should be made through time and with competitors. Industry analysis, benchmark analysis, and trend analysis. Now, it's going to vary from company to company within an industry and what kind of business you're trying to run. Are you trying to be a low cost leader? Are you trying to be high value? You can be both things within an industry. Think like McDonald's and Hopcat. They both serve hamburgers, but one you actually sit down and have a sit down meal like Hopcat. The other one you're going through a drive through and it's real quick, real quick. So there's 5 major categories of ratios in the questions to answer. Liquidity. Do you have enough money to pay your bills? Asset management. Do you have the right mix of assets versus sales? Debt management. How much are you borrowing versus how much equity are you putting out there? Profitability. Do sales prices exceed the cost? Are you charging enough? And are sales high enough as reflected in the different ratios? Market value. Do investors like what they see as reflected in price earnings and market to book ratios? So we're going to go through a bunch of ratios real quick. You do not need to memorize these. Just memorize that you can find the ratios and have a general idea of what they mean. The current ratio, current assets divided by current liabilities, very easy. You find both those numbers on the balance sheet. The quick ratio, current assets minus inventories divided by current liabilities. Again, you can find all this information on the balance sheet. So our current ratio was 2.33. It dipped down to 1.7. Now it's back up to 2.34. You can see 2020, 0.85, 0.84. These are both below the market average, but we don't know what the goal is for De Leon's for these ratios. Here it's saying the liquidity position is weak. Maybe that's on purpose. Maybe it's not. We don't know for sure. De Leon's inventory turnover versus the industry average. The estimate is 3.42. The industry is 5.5. This is much, much lower. Inventory turnover is below industry average. De Leon might have old inventory or his control might be poor. No improvement is currently forecasted. Um, Days sales outstanding, average number of days after making a sale before receiving cash. How quickly do people pay you? This is 46.44 days. The industry average is 32. So people are paying us on average 2 weeks later than most places. Um, so we have a poor credit policy. So far we have way too much inventory on hand and we're not collecting our money as fast. Fixed assets and total assets turnover ratios versus the industry average. Fixed asset turnover equals sales divided by net. Fixed assets, 8.45. And then our turnover assets, sales by total assets. And all these numbers can be found on your income statement and your balance sheet. And you see the industry average here is 7 and 2.6. So the fixed assets turnover is going to exceed the industry average, and the TA turnover below the industry average. We have too many current assets. So that ties back to what our earlier ratios had. People aren't paying us fast enough, and we have too much stuff on hand. Calculate the debt to capital ratio and times interest earned ratio. Debt to capital is total debt divided by total invested capital, which is 26.39. And times interest earned is just EBIT, earnings before income taxes, divided by interest, which is 5.11. Now remember, we're going through these fast. The ratios, you'll always be able to find. We want to see what the ratios are and how it ties back to the industry. How are we doing against other competitors, other people in our fields? This is important because we want to know how other people in our industries are doing things, but we also need to make decisions for ourselves. Where do we want to be in comparison to our industry? Profitability ratios, operating margin, profit margin, and basic earning power. So profit margin is just net income divided by sales. Basic earning power, earnings before income taxes, EBIT divided by total assets. So 357.6 divided by 34.97, 10.23. Are these good? Oh, and then ARP operating margin, sorry, I glossed over that. 357.6 divided by 6901, 5.18. So here, the operating margin, 5.18, industry is 7.3. The profit margin is 3.7, industry is 4.3. Basic earning, 10.23, 19.1. You can see we've made great increases over the prior year, but we're still well below the industry as a whole. So, appraising profitability with operating margin, profit margin, and basic earning power. Operating margin was really bad in 2021. That's going to be a theme as we go through everything. It's in, it's projected to improve in 2022, but we're still going to be below the industry average. Same thing with profit margin. It's going to improve, but it's going to be below industry average. Basic earning power, um, it's a good comparison. It's going to improve, but it's still below the industry average. So we have a bunch of things below industry average. So here we have a couple more profitability ratios. Return on assets and return on equity. Return on assets, 7.31. Return on equity, 13.1. These are important because you borrow money and then you try to make money on it. So if you're borrowing money at 8%, but your assets are only returning 7.31, you're actually losing money on that money you're borrowing. You should borrow money at less than what your return on assets is. Same with return on equity. You should be borrowing money for less than what this number is. And we can see return on assets is higher in the industry. Much better from a year ago, but still we're way below the industry. So, effects of debt on return on assets or return on equity. Holding assets constant. If debt increases, equity has to go down because the balance sheet is assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. So assets stay the same, debt increases, equity goes down, interest expense increases, which leads to a reduction in net income. That means the return on assets declines. Return on assets may increase, or returns on equity may increase or decrease, since both net income and equity decline. Problems with return on equity and shareholder wealth are correlated, but problems can arise. Return on equity doesn't consider risk. Return on equity does not consider the amount of capital invested. You should look at return on equity, but it's not a huge thing to look at. It's a small thing. Economic value added is much better to look at. Here we're looking to calculate the price earnings and market book ratios. Price earnings is just the price divided by the earnings per share, 11.9, well below the industry average. Market price divided by book value, 1.56, well below the industry average again. We're getting better. We're better from 2020, but still we're well below the industry average. So the market value ratios, price to earnings, how much investors are willing to pay for $1 of earnings. Market book, how much investors are willing to pay for $1 book value for each ratio. The higher the number, the better. Um, PE and NB are high if expected growth is high and risk is low. So here we have enterprise value. That's a complicated formula right there for De Leon's. Enterprise value divided by EBITDA, earnings before income taxes, depreciation. Calculations are as follows. Assume bonds are at par value. So here we're figuring out how much a bond would cost us. Here's about 7.7. 2021 it was 20. 2020 it was 6.28. And then we have the DuPont equation. Return on equity equals profit margin times total assets times the equity multiplier. Return on equity equals net income divided by sales times sales divided by TA times TA divided by equity. Total assets, total assets. It focuses on its expense control, asset utilization, and debt utilization. This is just another equation that we can do. And you can see 3.71 times 1.97 times 1.79 equals the 13.1. Don't get too big on these equations and figuring out what they mean. Just make sure you reference the spreadsheet to have this readily available. How to improve an example, the effects of proven ratios. So sales a day is 18,905. What if we get the firm's days sales outstanding to 32 days? What's going to happen? Well, we're going from 46 to 32. We're going to get $270,000 more money in the door. That's going to have a ton of improvement on all of our ratios. We're going to make more money too. What can we do with the new cash? How is the stock price and risk going to be affected? Potential uses, repurchase of stock, expand business, reduce debt. All these actions would improve the stock price. Remember, we're having a, so we take that money and we can maybe buy a new inventory system because we have way too much inventory and we need to get that inventory either built later or off the shelves faster. Lots of things we can do when we have more money. Some potential problems and limitations, financial ratio analysis. Comparison with industry averages is difficult for a big firm that has many different divisions. Yeah, obviously. Different operating and accounting practices can distort comparisons. Just because McDonald's and Burger King are in the same industry doesn't mean they record their transactions the same way. And sometimes it's hard to tell if a ratio is good or bad. It depends on the business and what the managers of the business want to do. And it's difficult to tell whether a company is on balance in a strong or weak position. And some other issues, average performance is not necessarily good. Maybe the firm can do better. Seasonal factors can distort ratios. Let's say you have a ski business. Well, in the middle of summer on those mountains, there's not a lot of people skiing. So seasonal factors can really make things difficult. Window dressing can make statements and ratios look better than they actually are. Remember, we talked about taxes in the last chapter. Depending on how you do your different taxes, you might actually be better or worse than you look like. Remember the difference from 2020 to 2021 to 2022? Huge swings. And then inflation can change things. All right, that's chapter 3 and 4 this week. Make sure you go through the homework, get that done. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to help.